everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. Today, I'm so excited because divine timing and many things are bringing this appointment together, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. Teresa and I will be interviewing Rachel Wong. She is the host of the Feminine Genius podcast, and she has a beautiful story. We can't wait to learn more about her. But the reason that I said this is such like a divine appointment is because we actually got a lot of help from Rachel as we were starting this podcast. And it was just like a random appointment online. We found each other. We started talking about podcasts, The Feminine Genius, and it was like we were just in sync. So as Teresa and I were brainstorming who would be interviewing this season of the Hormone Genius podcast, of course, we definitely wanted to bring Rachel Wong into the circuit. So we're super excited to get started. So Rachel, to start, how about you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm coming to you from Vancouver, Canada, and I was born and raised Catholic. I'm the oldest of three girls, so it's my parents and my sisters and I, and we all live together here. I went to Catholic school and I went to church all my life, and it just kind of seemed like the thing to do. Like we just got into a rhythm. I got, really into it, I guess, as a kid. But I think as I grew older, and I know that we'll maybe talk about this in a little bit, but what I found was that my faith certainly wasn't personal. Like it just seemed like a set of rules. It seemed like we would just go to mass and that was it. So there was no real personal connection to the faith. And I remember one of my earlier memories in my life was just thinking that if God existed and God really loved us, then why was there so much suffering in the world? So growing up, I had a lot of issues with like bullying, and mental health became a huge part of my own story and my journey. And yeah, maybe like we'll chat a little bit about because I know we talked about this earlier, Jamie, about this profound experience that I had when I was 20 years old with God. Um, but we'll get to that. But currently, right now, I work for the university that I graduated from. So I graduated from Simon Fraser University with a degree in communication and international studies. And I work for the university. I do marketing and communications for one of our campuses. And as you alluded to, I'm the host of the Feminine Genius podcast. So I've been doing that for just over a year and a half. It's been a lot of fun. And, very similar to you both, I'm very passionate about women. And of course, like in the spirit of John Paul II, who I love, love, love so, so much, just really highlighting the unique dignity and the vocation that we have as women, as mothers, as wives, as religious, whatever it might be. Each one of us are so called to do so many unique things. I see that here in this podcast, and I see that with everyone that I meet. So that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Rachel, I first want to say I love your accent. Just the hints of your accent that come out. Is that the Vancouver? Is that the Canada thing?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's funny to say that. And I don't hear it very often, but that might be just because I talk to a lot of Canadians, and I know that Eastern Canada, for example, they have a very particular accent that we over on the West Coast make fun of constantly. But it's funny to hear that. So thank you. I appreciate it. It might be the Pacific Northwest type accent. I'm not sure.
I love it. I think as a little child, I always wanted an accent. So whenever I hear one, I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. I want an accent too.
Thank you.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, so Rachel, so you grew up in terms of like the spiritual health, it was maybe the way I understand it, it fell a little flat in terms of maybe the why behind the importance of, faith. And of course, like Teresa and I know you too, Rachel, we really value health as body, mind, and spirit. When one is off, we can't be well. It just isn't going to work. It's like a three-legged stool, one's off, it tips, that kind of deal. So I'm interested to hear about, what happened in your life where it went from kind of flat to flourished or fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I alluded to, I had, some issues with bullying and really maybe a distorted self view and really misunderstanding myself and who I really was. And I absolutely take your point, like holistic health, mind, body, and spirit is so important, because what I found was that as I was going through life, especially in high school, and I'm sure as we think back to our high school experiences, they're not always great and they can be very difficult sometimes. So I think back to my own experience, and it was definitely challenging just because I really felt just like I was always going through a fog. Like there would be days where I just like would not want to get up, or I couldn't get up just because I felt so depressed and anxious. And like I do have depression and generalized anxiety, and panic disorder. And what I found was that a lot of these things, as you're mentioning, because I had all of these like storms in my mind, I saw that manifest in my physical health as well. So I would be getting sick, like, without fail, probably like 4 or 5 times a year, which I don't think is normal. But at the time, like that was my life. So I just got sick super often. And then of course, like I would get stressed that I was missing school or I was missing activities. And that carried on into my university life. I would probably get sick twice a semester. And we were a trimester school, so 3 semesters, so 6 times a year again. Um, and I would say, like, the moments that I found that my faith, or even my mental health went from, as you're saying, flat to flourish, was really, I guess, coming into contact with my faith again. Um, so I'm not sure, like, to what extent your listeners may be involved in the Catholic faith, or the Christianity or what have you. But in the Catholic tradition, we have something called Eucharistic adoration. Now, as a Catholic, I had never had any exposure to that growing up, and I had my first encounter with Eucharistic adoration because we believe in the Catholic tradition that Jesus is there and present in the bread or the host. And we had this experience at a conference that I attended back in 2016, and we were just invited to go and adore and worship. And prior to that, I had really hit this low point. Like that semester was probably one of the worst semesters that I had. Ironically, not academically, like it was actually a very strong semester academically, but I knew that it came at a cost. I knew that I had really pushed myself to like my mental capacity, my physical capacity. I think I was getting sick. Like I'd gotten sick every month that semester, so that was not great. Um, but I also reached this point of really despairing and just wondering, okay, like what is my life all about? And I feel like at some point, every person, kind of hits that. But I really was questioning that. I was just like, okay, like I have these good grades, but at what cost? Like I feel like my life is going well. I feel like I kind of know what my career trajectory is, but at what cost? And, I went into that conference feeling very broken, and almost to the point where like I had wanted to commit suicide. And this was something that I had grappled with all throughout high school, but, never so intensely. And it was prior to going to that conference where I had those experiences where, I thought that I wanted to end my life, but I could feel this inexplicable kind of someone holding me back. And, I didn't think too much of it until I got to the conference, until I found myself, kneeling in front of the Blessed Sacrament. So kneeling in front of Jesus. And, just hearing in a whisper him say to me that he knew me, and he knew my identity. And I think that, that is really something that we spend our entire lives chasing, is figuring out who we are and what is it all for? Like, what is life all for? So hearing him say that he knew me, Rachel, like in a sea of 7 billion people, like he knew me personally. And maybe what I'll do is I'll close with this little tidbit that the theme of that year's conference was taken from the prophet Isaiah. And the verse is, I have called you by name. And I didn't realize that until after I'd left the conference. I was like, holy moly, like, he knows me. He knows every person before me. And, after I pass away from this earth, he'll know everyone to come, and he knows everybody. He knows you and I so intimately. And I think from there, like what I noticed was that not only did my mental health start to improve significantly, and sure, like there are good days, like even now, good days and bad days, I should say. But what I found was that a lot of the physical things, like, I had a lot of tremors and shaking, a lot of migraines, even getting sick all the time. I noticed that over time, my physical health actually started to improve. So, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, it really was God who has always been looking out for me, and just protecting me and helping me to flourish, because it was clear that I wasn't done just yet. So.
That's amazing, Rachel. Thank you for opening up and sharing that. I know so many women out there struggle with anxiety and depression. So I just know there's a lot of women listening right now that are just feeling like, wow, have experienced that. I've gone through that. And it also just makes me realize that whether you come from a faith background or not, I mean, I want to focus on the words to be known,
Mhm.
because no matter what, whether you have a religious background, we all desire in our hearts to be known. Like that's a central truth in all of us. And it goes to say that your health really is impacted by your inability to feel that sense of identity, or feeling that we are known in some way by the world, by other human beings. And I think it's amazing. Of course, we that have faith believe God, of course, heals, but there's also this reality that even your mental health improving impacted your physical health. And that's truly something, again, that goes back to the whole mind, body, spirit thing in health, that you have to have, all of those things being met. So that's amazing. And I would love to now hear about how this translates into, how you get to the Feminine Genius podcast, and what is it about, like, us as women and that central truth to be known that really spoke to you, and how you wanted to speak to the world about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And certainly there was a gap of time in between. But I think, just to come back to something that you said, like to be known, um, one of the things that I'd been searching for my whole life is, like you were saying, is really to be known as a person. And then I think once I got a good sense of that, it's like, okay, like as a human being, as a child of God, like I'm known by Him and I have an identity in Him. Now, of course, as women, like we know that we are very uniquely made and we're very different from men. And yes, there's like that equality there, like we have male and female, and that's equally important, but we have that distinct value to it. And I think as I was going through university, like I went to a very, let's say, radical university. There were a lot of professors who were, they made it explicit that they were, maybe not so much like anti-Catholic, but they had very particular views of different things. One of those being women's rights. And of course, like, I'm all for equal pay. And I was like, I wanted to smash the glass ceiling and I wanted to be a boss and kind of be known in that way. But I think where my faith kind of crept in, and maybe like God whispering again, I realized that as I was going through the latter part of my degree, I realized that there was a real attack on femininity. And what I mean by that is that there's a, of course, like in the media, for example, like the hypersexualization of women, but also just there's so much messaging out there that tells us like who we should be, or what we should aspire to be, or what will make us happy, as a woman. So whether it's like, sex or alcohol or shopping, like a very tiny bikini, like having like, perfect breasts, or like, the skinny waist, whatever it might be. And I never really felt drawn to that, nor did I feel like I could see myself in any of it. And at first I was thinking like, yeah, like I don't see myself anywhere. I don't see myself represented anywhere. But then I think there was, and again, I attribute it to God. There was a fundamental shift there where it's like, well, is that really what I'm made for? And it occurred to me that no, it's like, that's not what I'm made for. Like I'm made for so much more. And of course, like not to diminish like the people who, work in media or work in marketing or on those who are on those ads. Of course, like everybody has that dignity. But I realized that there was so much more that I was called to. And it was I would say a moment of divine inspiration where I got the first stirrings of starting this podcast when I was at World Youth Day in Panama in 2019. It was January 2019. And I have a bit of a radio background, and I knew that I wanted to do something with it, but I didn't know what. And I got these first stirrings of it, and it had followed me for about 5 months because I kind of pushed it aside. And again, actually, I was in front of the Blessed Sacrament in May of 2019. And in one of the maybe most clear engagements of dialogue that I had with God, we talked about, he was inviting me to start a podcast. And, one of the big things that I was worried about was, okay, well, what is it going to be about? What am I going to talk about? What is my niche? And again, like, he inspired me. He's just like, what it is. And the term feminine genius had echoed in my mind, and I thought it was a really beautiful thing. Teresa, I noticed that you have John Paul II behind you there. And, I did a quick Google search of the feminine genius, and was so surprised to find, John Paul II and his letter to women, which he wrote in 1995. And what I found so striking about it was that it was already written over 20 years ago, and yet it seemed like it was just written that morning. Like, just how profound it was that he was speaking about women and our identity, and how we don't need to change who we are. And there have been a lot of difficult things that have happened for women. Like, women have really suffered, maybe like on the wrong end of humanity, and historically we've really suffered. And yet we're called in this way to still like rise above that and call not just men, but other women, everybody around us, to higher, to be better. And we do that by living out our femininity in the way that God had intended it. And I know that Jamie and I had talked about that before, so I'm stealing your words a little bit there. But when we are able to live out our feminine genius, when we are able to live out our feminine identity, and when we kind of know what that destination is, which is ultimately, to heaven, but on this side of heaven now, like where we are right now, when we're able to call other people to be better and be better humans, be better women, be better men, we are living out our call, and we do that in a variety of ways. But once I read that, my heart was just like, it broke wide open, because I realized that this was the fundamental truth of what it meant to be a woman. And we know that, John Paul II had a beautiful relationship with Mary. So it was no secret that like he was inspired by Mary, and that really helped him to come to those conclusions about femininity. So I think from there, that's what sparked it. And, in a month, he made it happen. God made it happen. And we launched on June 1st. And the rest is history, as they say.
It's beautiful. When you think about the feminine genius, so we know like there are core themes of the feminine genius, and I can't remember all four, or maybe I'm saying four and there are more, but like receptivity, nurturing, what are the other two? I don't mean to put
obedience and sensitivity.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk a bit about that. I think sometimes, and I was sharing this a little bit in the podcast, in the Feminine Genius podcast, Rachel, when you interviewed me, it just was released the 26th of October on her platform. But, sometimes I think that when feminine genius seems vague. I love the sound of it, but what does it mean? And so I remember as I was kind of digging into what is the feminine genius? What is it? There are these patterns that women show, these beautiful gifts that we have the capacity for, whether we're practicing it or not. We have the capacity for it. Feminine genius isn't like, I'm going to be pretty today, or I'm going to dress in a dress, or go in, dance in a recital, or whatever the case is. I think sometimes if people hear that word feminine genius, they might think, what the world thinks about feminine, whatever in people's minds. Okay. Long question, but the question is, what are the core tenets of the feminine genius, and what do they mean to you?
Yeah, like just so what you were talking about, so receptivity and nurturing, sensitivity, and oh no,
Obedience.
obedience. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
well, I
those
forgot it the
four.
first time you reminded me. It's perfect.
So those four things, like I think that, at the heart of it, all four of those can be played out in such a variety of ways. But I think, like, as you drill down to each unique person, so there's the three of us here, obviously each of us have very unique paths and stories and vocations and whatnot, but as you drill down, you can see different aspects of those four core tenets. And I think, like you're saying, feminine has really taken on a life of its own as a term. Like, we think of it as frilly or only pink or whatever it might be. Um, but really, it's like, when I think about feminine, especially like in the Catholic context, or like as I've read John Paul II's work, it's really, um, like it's opening ourselves up. So to be receptive, so to receive other people as they are and to meet them where they are, to talk to them and to really get to the heart of what it is that they're dealing with. um, you know, Being able to nurture. So all women, believe it or not, are called to be mothers, even if you're not married. And of course, like, hear me correctly. When you're married, of course, like, you're able to partake in that biological motherhood, and you're able to have children within those, within marriage, and you have that children blessed to you by God. But even as a religious sister, or even a single person, for example, they can have spiritual children, so they can nurture that mothering relationship, through like whoever it is that they might be journeying with. And just being like open and, again, like receptive, and being able to bring them. And I think that that's really like at the heart of it, is really, like I was mentioning earlier, it's like when we are nurturing different people and we're receptive to them, we're sensitive to their needs, um, we're able to really see, I think at the end of the day, it's like who they were meant to be. God had endowed in each of us a purpose. And, John Paul II, I'm not quoting this perfectly, but in his letter to women, he says that women have this innate gift, really, to really see the other person as they are. And actually, St. Edith Stein, who had inspired him, 60, 70 years earlier, again says that the world needs women as they are. So as women, I feel like that's really like the heart of the feminine genius, is to be able to really recognize what it is that's going on below the exterior and below the surface, and not to, blatantly call people out and be like, no, like, why are you being fake, like, why are you doing that? But you notice too that in the really deep relationships that we have with women, our sisters, our mothers, our daughters, whatever it might be, as so long as it's approached with love, of course, we're able to really go to another person, go to another woman, for example, and be like, no, like, I know who you are. I know who you are at the core of your being. And I know that whatever is going on right now, like whether it is that you notice that they're feeling down, or they might be acting out, or something is going on, something doesn't really jive, like, I know that that's not you. So, how can I grow with you? How can I journey with you, and really unpack what it is that's going on, so that we can get back to who you're meant to be?
Something that, as you were talking about those core tenets of femininity, or the feminine genius, what I'm so fascinated by is the biological reality that mirrors the internal reality. So when we talk about receptivity, we receive others. Okay, how does our body receive another? Well, just look at a naked man and woman, you'll figure it out. Like, it tells a story, like our body tells a story. And often you just need to look at the body and it tells us the story of the feminine genius. So receptivity, you look at the man, you look at the woman, you see how a man receives, or a woman receives a man, just biologically, emotionally, and all the other things too, for sure. And then, so it's receptive. And then nurturing our breasts, whether we're nursing a child or not, our breasts are a sign of nurturing. So our biological reality can nurture others. And then there's the sensitivity. Our body does react often in tears, and that's okay, because guess what? Our hormones do shift throughout the course of the cycle. So there's this biological reality that there are times when women legit are more sensitive. We're just more tender during certain times. I mean, And I learned too, I think maybe I shared this in a past podcast, but like as our estrogen increases, we speak more words, we're more nurturing and whatnot, but we're also more empathetic when our when our estrogen's high. We're more empathetic, we're more receptive, we're more nurturing. So it's beautiful to know and see that there's that correlation between our physical nature, our spiritual nature, our emotional nature, our biological nature. To me, it fascinates me so much.
Yeah.
Share that.
Since, we're the Hormone Genius podcast, maybe it's appropriate to see like where Rachel, like, do you have any wisdom to share about your own hormone genius, or even with your like struggles with mental health? Like, is there anything that you can share that was helpful that you learned about the biological reality of your hormones and how it fits into you as a person?
Yeah, you know what, the first thing that comes to mind actually, just as you're asking that, is just some conversations that I've had over the years about, over spiritualizing. So of course, like within the mental health context, and maybe to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier, like holistic health, like of course, you need to be able to treat things on a natural level, before maybe we can delve into like the mental and spiritual side of things. So I think that's important, and it was just something that kind of came to mind there. But in terms of like hormones and thinking about my own like physical health, I think one of the key things that come up, um, and I see it time and time again, in my own life and with other women, is that we do we do wonderful things with the fact that women are very resilient, as we know, and we are always out there to really help the other person. And we want to do what's best for the other person because that's just innate in our nature. But I think one thing that I remember someone telling me once, was just like, they reminded me that as much as, yes, like we want to be out there to help other people, we also need to remember to show that same empathy and show that same self-compassion, really, like to ourselves. So one of the things that I found, especially like as I was growing up, was that I was experiencing a lot of burnouts. And yeah, like, that might have come up through like mental health things, but also just on a physical level, like I was really burnt out, and like I was really running my health to the ground in some ways. And a lot of it came from, yeah, like maybe just not treating my body well, but also just like really taking on a lot of things, like really taking on too much. So just allowing yourself those moments to really slow down, because I think that we start to see as we get older that we really maybe can't afford to maybe take our body for granted as we get older. It's so important to really take care of ourselves, and that really does start with us. And I know that I myself am super stubborn, like I want to be able to do the things and I want to be able to help other people, but sometimes it is important just as much to slow down, because the minute that we are kind of out of commission, you realize that no one's helping anybody. So how can we take that knowledge and that wisdom that we're sharing with other people to take care of them, and how, when we're taking care of other people, how do we reflect that back to ourselves? Because I think that that's just important. So yeah, like keeping track of your cycle, understanding that, and really taking those steps to educate yourself on those things, and then also taking the steps, once you know it up here, then bring it down to your heart and be like, okay, yes, like I have to take care of myself, and to be convicted in that.
Awesome.
Great advice.
Rachel, so as we close, and so we talked about faith and how that's really integral as a part of your physical health, as a part of your spiritual, of course, and then your emotional health. It's all integrated. But if you were to give yourself advice 10 years ago, let's just say, what do you wish you would have known about your feminine genius or your hormone genius 10 years ago? What kind of advice would you give yourself? And all women, like young women.
I think, what, it's funny, just because, yes, I would tell myself this 10 years ago, but maybe I also tell myself this now, that, we are, I am a strong woman. And I know that it's such a simple statement, but I think it bears repeating many times over in a day, just because I feel like the world really does knock us down. And I know that, yeah, 10 years ago, I think back, what was I doing 10 years ago? Probably not having the time of my life. So yeah, I was knocked down so many times, but we are resilient and we're strong, maybe not in the ways that we think we need to be, but there are ways in which we are strong, and that will come out in our character, in what we do, in our relationships. And, we're worth it. We're worth waiting for, I think. And that would apply to all aspects. So, yeah, we're worth waiting for, and we're worth being patient for, because we are strong and resilient beings.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Rachel. So to our listeners, please check out Rachel's podcast. So today you learned a little bit about her, but if you check out our podcast, you get to learn even more about her and the people that she interviews in regards to this topic. So it's super duper important. We're so thankful for Rachel. Check out the FeminineGeniusPodcast.com or at FemGenius Pod is where you can also find her and follow her on social media. So thanks again, Rachel, for jumping on and sharing with the world a little bit about you and your story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.